Good evening. Thank you for everyone for joining tonight. From now, we would like to start with this tie-up event between Nissan Art Award 2020 and Yokohama Triennale 2020, perspectives from curators and artists on the new normal. Our panel discussion will begin now. My name is Naoko Horiuchi, and I'm working for the Nissan Art Award Project Office and as curator of Arts Initiative Tokyo, and I will be the moderator tonight. So thank you for joining. So, sorry, I have to wear a mask tonight. Do you understand? I would like to introduce the speakers today. First of all, from the Yokohama Triennale, joining by Zoom, the artist directors, Rax Media Collective, Jibesh Bakchi and Monica Narula are joining tonight. And here in the studio, also involved with the Triennale, Yokohama Museum of Art since April, Mika Kuraya. And also the Nissan Art Award International Jury Member and founding director of the NTU Center for Contemporary Art Singapore and Professor Art Nanyang Technological University School of Art, Design and Media, Ute Metambawa. We cannot see on the screen at the moment, but if Ute is there. Yes. Thank you. And also another international jury member and senior advisor of the Mori Art Museum, Fumio Nanjo. So people are joining from Zoom and are here in the studio, but we will be talking for the next hour and a half. But before that, I would just like to simply introduce the Yokohama Triennale and Nissan Art Award. First of all, about the Yokohama Triennale, it takes place once every 3 years as an international art exhibition and started in 2001. This is the 7th installment. Fumio Nanjo is joining here in the studio, is the first, one of the first artist directors. And Rax Media Collective, who are the artist director this time, who are joining by Zoom. They are organizing the 2020 Triennale under the theme Afterglow. It started November 2019. They have, it's involved with 3 different venues: Yokohama Museum of Art, Plot 48, NYK Motor Museum, and it will continue until October 11th. Nissan Art Award is a contemporary art award that began in 2013, and this is the 4th event. From 2017, it is being held every 3 years in the same period as the Yokohama Triennale. And this kind of tie-up event is the first attempt. This award, 10 artists who have shown outstanding activities over the last 2 years are nominated by nomination committee members. And Ute and Fumio Nanjo, who are panelists, recommended 5 artists: Sachiko Kazama, Soichiro Mihara, Nobuko Tsuchiya, Iwada, and Ishu Han for this award. Nissan Pavilion is the venue for this event, and it started on August 1st and continues till September 22nd. And the award ceremony will happen on August 26th. This will also be taking place online. The finalists from 8:30 in a kind of extra edition will be giving a simple introduction to their work in the exhibition. We look forward to that. From now on, we would like to start the discussion, but the Nissan Art Award and the Yokohama Triennale have had experienced influence effects by the coronavirus. The artist director Rux Media Collective were unable to come to Yokohama, but online they continued organizing the event, holding meetings and such. And the Nissan Art Award also, the committee members, the jury members were unable to come to the site, to Japan, online. Were talking with artists via Zoom and seeing the works online. And of course, the artists themselves also faced some difficulties, challenges. So, for example, one artist was meant to do a collaboration with collaborators from overseas, but this became complicated. And also, well, reacting to the events that were happening due to the virus. So in terms of all of these events, not only to art, but other things, not only physically, but also experiencing art. There's some, it's a chance to think about the importance of art and the effects it has. And also how we are able to coexist with a virus. These kind of things, these kind of thoughts came to my mind. So, of course, this is a global crisis, but there are other issues that have come to the fore at the same time. Challenges with climate change and human rights. And within that, the international exhibitions, the kind of our thoughts and how to be involved. So, yeah, how I would like to ask the people, the panelists, what they think about how art can function in these times. So this time asking the trends in art and activities of artists in such a situation of crisis, from your perspective as persons involved in museums, universities, or as curators, what kind of effect art can have? And how are you looking at the events that are taking place? And yeah, to ask about the artworks that the artists in the Triennale and the Nissan Art Award in general, how they reflect your views. So next, I would like to ask the artists to speak about their thoughts. First, Rux Media Collective, please.
Can you all unmute? Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you, Naoko, for inviting us this afternoon and to be on the panel with people we admire and respect and whom we know for some shorter or longer time. It's an interesting sort of situation that we're all living through right now, but I just want to, I think what I want to start by doing is just sort of refocus the way we are looking at things a little bit. First of all, I think, for example, that you said that the theme of this Triennale is Afterglow, and I just want to say that it's not a theme. The title of the exhibition is Afterglow, and the point was to think about that condition that happens after an event. Sometimes the event can be tremendous and beautiful, but it can also be traumatic, such as a radioactive event, of course. So you have an afterglow of that. And the reason we call it afterglow are many, but what is interesting is, of course, that in this moment, we are now living through an event which is generating a kind of simultaneous glow. And some of the sort of, and just to sort of clarify a little bit further, what are the ideas that we addressed or we started with when we were thinking the Triennale? First was we began to think about light. So actually these ideas led to the title, but let me talk about the ideas. First was to think about light differently. When we realized that many images of history and aesthetics conceived of at different times and in many places, this meet literally through the power of light. And we question ourselves about what light and its power are and what they represent. Often, light becomes more than something you are surrounded by. It can be an occasion to look at the infrastructure of life itself, and that's what we were interested in. Light shifts from being a metaphor to being an actual sort of method to look at the infrastructure of how we live. Light is a powerful metaphor, which we know, that is used in several cultures, especially in the Semitic religions. It has given rise to the dichotomy of luminosity and darkness, or light and darkness, which is an intriguing opposition because when you look deeply at light, you're actually looking deeply at the sort of histories that brings with it. And so in our conception, at least, light becomes a process of awareness and of curiosity and understanding. Luminosity is an order of light that allows us to create a sort of movement to reach to a wider expansion of light. So we are separating luminosity from, say, enlightenment or illumination. It becomes a space where cultures and materials can speak to us in a different way. And this can be whether it's about friendship or about biological behavior of marine species or in watching stars in the sky, because when we're in this space of luminosity, we are able to look at reality itself differently, not at what it lights up, but what it glows, but why it glows in the first place. And I think that is also going to be useful when we think about the kind of times that we're living through these days.
And the second aspect that I would bring in with this question of luminosity, move a little sideward in the COVID times, specifically since one something that is an inquiry that we have for very long trying to understand is the relationship between sovereign and what kind of way in which the storytelling done by the sovereign has to be moved away from the main stage. The foregrounding cannot be always the story told by the sovereign. So there is a very nice anthropologist which looks at deeply into caste transformation in India, Badri Narayan, and he picks up a folk tale from a village in Shahapur in Uttar Pradesh, and where he says a very interesting thing. The folk tale is very simple. There is a bird called Lal Muni who sings for everyone, and the king is very troubled by that reality. The king wants, and from an advice, he takes an advice from a godman or a swami, said it should sing through me. All the narratives, all the stories should be told by Lal Muni through me. I should be the main protagonist by which these narratives have to be told. And this is a battle that is then posed by Lal Muni. Lal Muni refuses, king battles on. And I think one of the things in our lives is this continuous battle between the sovereign taking over the storytelling and artists and practitioners of images, speech, scholars. All our battle is to find that other space sideways, where we can recuperate other and invent other ways of telling stories. This is one theme that in the COVID time becomes much more accelerated, much more present, especially in major countries like US and India, which was going to geopolitically define the world fundamentally. So Lal Muni's world, we want to all be part of Lal Muni's world, and that's one of the calling. The third aspect that I would like to join with Lal Muni in this is that one of the very strong tributary, a thread in the Triennale, and which is called the deliberations on discursive justice. And this is a thread that happens between Johannesburg, Hong Kong, Yokohama, with an ensemble, curator artist ensemble that assembled around it. And discursive justice makes a claim that each forum, or contemporary art for that matter, is a forum where through speech, through costume, through all kinds of performative gestures, through discourse, we always produce the question of justice. Not to give justice, but to inquire and investigate into the terms by which justice is produced in the world. And discourse is very strongly tied with this idea of justice. Because, and as you know, the last 20, 30 years, the biggest transformation in the world is the pull of justice to the discursive. And we know it from long history. Apartheid South Africa tells us that history. All the post-colonial debate tells us that history, and now the whole decolonial debates tells again this history. So this is to look at costume, speech, discourse in its full potential and call into the question of how do you create platforms and forums through contemporary art to keep this investigation alive. And this is directly connected. We think COVID times, it becomes much more urgent.
And finally, to address more directly the question that is the topic of tonight, the perspective of art in the time of this crisis or pandemic. See, the fact of the matter is that we had already finished conceptualizing and commissioning and inviting the art that was going to be in the Triennale by the time the COVID pandemic actually unleashed itself and became as full scale as it has become. But what is interesting is that a core concept that we were working with is how do we live with the forms of toxicity that emerge in human civilization? We were already interested in this question. Some forms are environmental and climatic, which many people have been thinking on, but there are many others which are more insidious and they are also civilizational. They seem to be the norms of life with the weight of tradition or modernity, it depends which ones you're looking at, behind them. But they're also harsh and they're devouring of humanity. So we know, for example, from our own Indic civilization, the kind of the structures of caste have been very, very insidious, and they have been almost impossible to excise completely. In a way, there's a false utopia that is generated in the last 50 years post-independence that degrades the complexity and the presence of the toxic. And I think this is something we have to address, that we live with the toxic. And now at the time of pandemic, living with the toxic has become so much more central. And as a matter of fact, we also know that vaccination or inoculation that it comes from is that you have to put in a little bit of the toxin within yourself so that you can live live with it, you can survive it. So living with this unliving thing called the COVID virus we are now faced with. So this dilemma is much, much stronger. And I think some of the invitations that we have made, some of the artwork that we have in the exhibition, some of the artists are actually thinking on this question and have been working on it for quite some time, such as artist from Japan called Masaru Iwai, who has a project called Broom Stars, an episodo actually in the Triennale, which is amazing if you follow it on Instagram, because he has in his own practices has been, for example, to look at the process of cleaning, especially post-Fukushima, where he had gone himself as a worker. But just the sort of centrality of cleaning, something which seems so invisible and yes, is at the heart of so much life. And Broom Stars has this amazing expanded network presence where people are cleaning, wearing the specific kind of personally modified masks that Masaru has made available, and cleaning both domestic and public space. This was just one sort of thought. There are many other artists, but I think we might be able to come back to them perhaps later.
Thank you. Next, we'd like to ask Yokohama Museum of Art, Mika Kuraya, to talk about her thoughts. Again, I will show you the images that she's talking about on PowerPoint. So where should I look to speak? Okay. So thank you. So this place, I don't like reading on paper, but I prepared a paper and passed it to the interpreter. So I will read this. Art in a world with coronavirus. So what is death? What is life? We are facing questions that would normally be unthinkable, such as what is the meaning of life and death in our daily lives, and how is life, human life and non-human life connected. As a result, our senses are sharper than they have ever been. With these sharpened senses, what can be comprehended from art? Here, I would like to think about the phenomenon of foresight. A good example of this, foresight is to see the future. So this was introduced in the RAX Media Collective, Yokohama Triennale 2020 Afterglow, Catch Light Fragments. It connects with this, I think. The RAX Media Collective in 2019, November 2019, they introduced autodidact luminescence and friendship and care. And what was discussed just at the end, poison. These were the keywords. So there's all kinds of fake news that are going around, and we are wondering, what should we be doing within this kind of learning independently? And while the world is really wounded at the moment, kind of making friendship, fostering friendship in that environment. But also accepting that poison also exists and coexisting with poison. This is kind of the theme, and it really fits well with the coronavirus. A kind of foresight of the situation today. So when we heard this theme in the 2019, I wasn't 100% certain of what it meant. But in 2020, this is the first time that I understood yes, what they meant. So in terms of foresight, this is a work that isn't in the Triennale, but the Japanese artist collective Chimpom. As an example, I would like to talk about their work. So Chimpom, last year in Manchester, England, they made a work about people who had died in the 19th century, cholera epidemic called a drunk pandemic. The images shown right now. They transformed underground cemetery, which had been forgotten for many years, and turned it into a brewery, and actually created an original beer called A Drop of Pandemic, and served it to the city inhabitants. So when this was done in Manchester, of course they didn't know about the pandemic in 2020. So in this way, how is it that artists have foresight like this? I would just like to kind of explore this in a logic way. So within scientific philosophy, the idea of abduction, advocated by C.S. Perth, may be helpful here as a logic that enables inventions and discoveries. I think maybe this is a good thing to look at. Abduction is, in Japan, it kind of means connected with aliens, but there's one more meaning. It's kind of a knowledgeable word, meaning observing facts and devising a theory that should explain those facts. So in terms of all the things that are in the world, observing them and devising a new theory from that. This is the basis. So at this time, in order for the observed facts to lead the discovery of a new theory, analogies, in a way, constructed relationships between different things that resemble one another. And another thing is metaphors, something and something else that are unrelated, that have a relationship. These two things play an important role in abduction. So, giving a concrete example, I would like to use a work from the Yokohama Triennale. In 2019, inevitably made by Park Chan-kyung, Belated Bossal is the name of his video work. It is underpinned by an episode concerning the death of Buddha. This is the image. So, yes, a video of about the death of Buddha. The appearance of people waiting for salvation by Buddha is overlaid with images of people from the Fukushima power station in 2011 waiting years and years until radioactive contamination disappears. In other words, those who wait for the salvation of Buddha and those who wait for the day when radioactive contamination disappears have an analogous or metaphoric relationship with each other. Furthermore, in 2020, we are talking about 2019 still, we are forced to live with the coronavirus and have superimposed ourselves onto the figure of those people as well. At the end of the work, an auto radiograph, which was taken in Fukushima since 2012. This is the on the left, on the bottom, is a bird, and on the right, bottom right, is a footprint. This is a technique whereby the part with radioactivity glows white and becomes visible in the image. It shows a situation in which things invisible to the eye are made visible through light. And through this, it's kind of the idea of sensing danger in our lives. This is exactly fitting to how we are going to live, coexist with the invisible threat of coronavirus. Park Chan-kyung observed some of the facts buried in past narratives and attempted to derive from them the meaning of living in the world post-Fukushima. And so we observed this work and find new analogies and metaphors in relation to the situation in 2020, exploring ways to live in the post-coronavirus era. So in this way, I am not attempting to romantically mystify the existence of artists as persons with a special ability to predict the future.
私はアーティストという存在を、未来を予見す
So
る特
the
殊な能力を持つ、ものとして
I don't think
ロマン主
that
義と
they
言われたみたいに神秘化しようとしているわけではありません。1968 年
in
フランスの思想家
1968,
ロランバルトが
the French
作者
thinker
の死という
Roland
記事を
Barthes
書きましたけれども
announced the death of the author and wrote a
作品と
book.
いうのは
Um,
一度作った人の
that
手を
is
離
to
れ
say,
たら
it is not the author who creates the real meaning of the
作っ
work,
て読み替えていくのは
but
作品を
the
受け取る読
but
者
the
や
person
作
who
品を見る
reads
観客
the
であるというふう
audience,
に言った
who is the main
でした
character,
つ
and
ま
this
り主
continues
人公は
to be valid
作者ではな
up
く
to
て
the
それを受
present.
け取る側の読者や
So
観
the
客
main
だという
character
ふうに
is
言った
the
のです
reader.
で私は、ソーシャリーエンゲージドアートとかリレーショナルとか
So in terms of
いろんな
socially engaged
アー
art,
トの方法が
installation art,
2000年代以降
since the 2000s, I think this way of thinking is very important, in my opinion, and very valid today. However, it is also true in the world of this kind of specialized knowledge and abilities. In the world of populism, even in Japan, this kind of knowledge is ignored, disregarded, or even ridiculed. And so populist politicians, or they kind of disregard information by scientists, experts. So this maybe can be understood in those terms. So in terms of what's that happening? The knowledge that the artists that have, the way that the artists convey to society the fruits of specialized techniques, like pass-through utilization of analogies and metaphors, and discover meaning in the present and future in order to continue this trend is quite important. So the artist is not a mysterious genius, but might be regarded as a profession similar to that of a shaman, who possesses the technique to interpret the present, foretell the future, and utilize this knowledge in society. Yeah, as a kind of a shaman, I would like to think of them. So in my presentation, I mentioned Chimpom and Pak Kyung. So when in thinking about the artist in terms of the shaman, there's John Jonasson, the American artist. This is also a good example of this kind of shaman analogy. So I would like to ask Ute about this artist. Amongst the Nissan Art Award, Kazama Sachiko, her Dislympic work in terms of the present Olympics, the past Olympics, is also kind of involved with the foresight of future Olympics. I would also like to ask Sachiko Kazama about her work as well. If we can broaden the discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much. So this idea of foresight, I think that, yeah, there were some very interesting points in your work. So we would like to ask Ute afterwards, yes, about that question. But first of all, we'd like to ask Fumio Nanjo. Also, after joining Nissan Art Award, if you could say a few things. So the theme that I was asked about was Corona. So I would like to say something quite practical, explanatory. So there are words like post-corona, with corona, new normal, these kind of key words that are being discussed. But in the art world, I think there are lots of possibilities in terms of these. This dialogue, this discussion, in terms of the museum, exhibitions, and people who appreciate the work and art itself. These really should be discussed separately, I think. If the coronavirus, if we are exposed to threats, virus threats in the future as well, then the model for exhibitions, the business model, these kind of blockbuster exhibition will, in particular, will be difficult. These were common in Japan, but they will become difficult to realize. And also the way that the works are appreciated will also change. So instead of the quantity, it will be the quality that will become important. So when appreciating an exhibition, when we think about what quality means, being able to look up works while listening to the commentary and understanding it carefully, making repeated visits, and maybe afterwards being able to talk about it with friends. These kind of things, I think, are important in terms of the quality of experience. But maybe there will be other ways of appreciating work as well, new ideas about quality. So if people cannot actually enter an exhibition, then the kind of idea of exhibition will be difficult, and money will become difficult for charging tickets. So maybe we have to organize an exhibition where we find funding, or we reduce the financial support needed. So of course, it is possible to imagine appreciating work online. But this, of course, is very different from physical experience. But in terms of many people be able to experience and experiencing physically, both of these things maybe become important, I think, from now. So in terms of the museum, museum is the thing with museum is that they have collections. So they are able to show their collections. So this is kind of different from just organizing an exhibition in itself. So then I really think the value of the collection will really become wider. So what kind of collection, what kind of pieces of a collection will people be looking for? What kind of works will be important? This will become important. I think this will become priority. So in terms of what the experience of real art, physically experiencing it, this is more difficult to say. So in terms of media art, well, this is no problem. It's already easy to share. But if physical experience of art becomes restricted, then I wonder how it will develop. But if we give one example, so for example, art might go into nature more. So avoiding the problem of the virus. So I just want to show one image. So one big example. This is Anish Kapoor's large work. This is shown at Gibbs Farm in New Zealand. What you can see at the very bottom is a person, so it's very large-scale work. So it's in nature, the work is in nature. So there is no risk in appreciating this kind of work if it is in a natural environment. And this is in the desert in Qatar. For 70 meters, running for 1 kilometer, these large monolithic works. In the middle of nowhere, we can say in English. But yeah, going in the middle of nowhere and then coming across these works. So in another way of saying it, showing work in nature like this is maybe interesting. So this already is very common in Japan, but maybe also kind of more personal experience. This is a Kurembo in Kuramae, Buddhist temple. So there's a work that is placed on the floor and in a completely white space. And all the walls, corners are curved. So we don't know which part is the wall, which part is the floor. So one person entering this space and experiencing directly. So maybe these kind of works will become important in the future. One important thing is how will art change? So as Kurators explained, artists will foresee the future or the things that they make out of intuition maybe will read the future. Just as Duchamp says, it's really up to the person. How does the person interpret the things changes the meaning. So art is about showing something invisible and how it connects with the reality and how they are used in reality. So things that are invisible that are made visible. This is something very important. I made an exhibition at Mori Art Center, and it was actually closed because of the coronavirus. So we used technology to still continue the exhibition, and it was about space. So from an observatory showing space images, but they are all slightly different. The spectrum, the waves, the spectrum is all slightly different. So in using this technology, the reality that we see changes. And the reality is expanded through this kind of technology. But actually the reality is dark. So in light, it is difficult to understand the depth of darkness. So the theme of the Triennale, the luminosity is very important. So actually, human beings don't really understand anything, but through art, it conveys this kind of feeling. So in terms of corona, we have to think about death. By thinking about death, we also think about what becomes important, what is priority. we have this work, Dance Macabre, in painting from the 14th and 15th centuries, and this is something that I thought about. I think the same can be said about works in the Nissan Art Award. So Isshu Han, his work, talking about loneliness. So outside it looks like the society is there, but it's actually nature and the individual and the relationship. And in the space, the video of the sea is projected. So it's very poetic, but it's also connected with our experience of living in the present. And also Tsuchiya works. There's this biological and organic kind of eeriness, wetness. It kind of connects with a kind of sense of fear. I also think this is connected with the COVID-19 experience. What art possesses, something that is invisible, being able to show this in this period, in this time, I think it really has a power to do that. Thank you, Nanjo. Being able to reveal something that is invisible, and also talking about light, these were very important words, I think. Thank you. Finally, I would like to ask Ute to share her thoughts.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much. Also, Nissan Art Award, and also I have to say, Nissan for their long-standing commitment to support the arts and to support also emerging artists and doing this in so many years. It's not a given. I also want to thank you all to be together here, Yuko, Mika, Monica, Chibesh, and of course Fumio-san. We were supposed to be here together in Yokohama, and which of course would have been great to see both the award, the Nissan Art Award, but also the Yokohama Triennale in person, because I think nothing replaces also the physical encounter with art, being one-to-one in the same space with a work of art. And but we also realize how big of a privilege it is to travel and to be together, something we very often take for granted. And I think that is something we really understand. I apologize immediately to the translators. I went a little bit off script, so bear with me. But to come back to the topic of today, what could be a new normal? I think we all might be agreeing there will be no new normal. And we have to accept that this pandemic is already a result about a complicated relationship that we have to our environment that is actually a habitat of many species. And I hope it's not just the artists who have the burden to engage in these challenging questions and situations, but hopefully also politicians who are actually entrusted and might have also the authority to put some necessary decisions in place. It cannot be left to the artists to address such matter. And what is meant with the normal actually would require quite its own debate, because I think the normal is it means something very different in a geopolitical situation and at each locale. So we would really have to see what was the normal anyway in a world of privilege versus a world that is more disenfranchised. And Jabesh and Monica also mentioned social justice, environmental justice, and again, this is not distributed equally around the globe. We also cannot separate the art world from the rest of the world. There is only one world, one resource that is to be shared between all life forms. And this is where the problem begins. Humans are a species that feel entitled to rule over all the other life forms. And I think also the topic of the Biennale is actually looking into this. There are things like illuminosity and as I said, like an afterglow, something we still need to understand. So there are different kind of like habitats that we have not yet even entered, but already are at the edge of destroying these habitats. This pandemic is just one in a series of pandemics that occurred throughout human history, from the plague to smallpox, Spanish flu, HIV, and more recently SARS and MERS. And regional epidemics like malaria, dengue, Ebola, and Zika still have a death toll of more than 500,000 every year. It's already a new normal, although it shouldn't be the case. So how can we speak about a new normal? In the world of these increasing inequalities, I mean, what we face is also who can afford to isolate, who can afford to deal and separate with this, and even who will be able to be exposed with art, etc. So we're really looking into a moment where basically the disbalance is even getting bigger, and really glad that artists are actually integrators, and of course also other friends and colleagues are addressing this. There is a need of action that we have to do here together, and art is not just for seeing something, but art is also often pointing to this kind of like inequalities, where I feel the political sphere is really a disappointing failure. But this pandemic should not have hit us also by surprise. Environmentalists and not just artists, indigenous people, ecofeminists, activists, critical thinkers and scientists, along with artists, have long warned about the irreversible destruction of the one planet that we have, the one Earth that we all share. They have shown us the grave and far-reaching consequences of human interference in the environment, from habitat destruction to zoonotic diseases. Monica mentioned the toxicity that we are facing regularly, from the climate crisis to scarcity, migration, and war. I think not all of you can see, but hopefully some of you can see the work Ghost Populations, a series by the artist Ines Dushak that she created between 2016 and 2019, where the artist combines ill human bodies with flora and fauna, transforming drawings from the 19th century medical textbooks into provocative exemplars, investigating desperation as an economic force. The artist points to the entire population's uproot and flee in the direction of the faintest glimmer of hope, only to find themselves in the worst predicaments, abandoned and deported, sold, abused, or stigmatized forever, circulating as extremely cheap and disposable commodities, human trafficking. While Dushak is giving visibility to such marginalized, abused, and displaced populations, her collages draw a dystopian mirage, reminding us of the pending threat of pandemic illnesses. And she made this project also way before we were confronted with COVID. But what she points to, and again, it's nothing new, it shows our complicated relationship to other life forms. These pandemics don't come out of the blue. And many of the artists also featured in the Nissan Art Award have addressed this ongoing complication relationship of humans and the natural world, which indicates that artists around the globe, including in Japan, are not expecting a new normal either. And I think it's the same case for the Yokohama Triennale that we unfortunately now cannot see. We know economic globalization came with a hefty price tag. And yet we are in shock and awe when hurricanes, flash floods hit our shores. Wildfires finally reach the living rooms of the affluent members of societies, and we pay attention. Rising sea levels are impacting global megacities, many located at shorelines. It is time to engage, to protect and to support the informants, including the artists, who expose systemic extractivism and hold its accomplices accountable. During the various lockdown periods around the globe, and not all at the same time and some recurring, many have reached out and joined forces as it became more than evident that we need global alliances, we need shared agency. We have to resist and thinking and acting as there might be ever a back to normal or a new normal. We have to confront and inhabit the continued state of exception that we humans have brought to this world. And I think it is really important to have more transdisciplinary conversations. And I think Rux Media, but also the artists featured in the Nissan Art Award actually introduced this necessity of engaging and discussing with other disciplines and activists and the people what is actually at stake. And giving really up that there might be some group that we think we have entrusted in addressing issues in our world, I mean the political sphere, in acting responsible. I think we face globally, particularly in this pandemic, that is not the case. And I really think it's time to demand also more global responsibility. I mean, many climate activists said climate actually doesn't know national borders, nor do pandemics. And I think that might be a good moment to start our discussion.
Thank you very much, Ute. So thank you for everyone's opinions. So after everyone has listened to each other's speeches, is there anything that you would like to first of all add? Okay, Kurea-san. So, listening to Ute's work, I really do agree. I talked about foresight. So, for a long time, I think a lot of people have realized this for a long time about a global crisis in terms of the environment changing, Tori influenza, and also what Fumio Nanjo said about Blockbuster exhibition not working anymore. I think there were many problems that were discussed over the past tens of years. So in terms of the corona issue is not new. In terms of rediscovering works about foresight. So in terms of not being a new age, and what we should do in this age that is not a new normal, actually, in terms of what Rax and what Ute is thinking. In 2011, in Japan, we had the Great East Japan earthquake and the Fukushima accident. So in terms of this big event happening. Of course, we already experienced that we cannot go back to how things were before. But in terms of using this word for new normal and kind of talking about the situation being under control for the Olympics, even though there is still danger from the Fukushima incident, talking about returning to some kind of normal is already a funny situation, I think. So in terms of our Japanese experience, it's kind of the second feeling of danger that we are experiencing in recent years. So trying to include this message in work, I think it's very important. One more thing. This is a little bit cynical to say, but in terms of having awareness of this problem and not consuming in the way that we would with capitalism. In terms of 2013 in Venice Biennale, Tanaka Koki, I was in charge of his work. At that time, the Biennale overall, the awareness of the problems, they were already talking about democracy. So 2 years after, when I went to see the Venice Biennale, there were a lot of immigrants from Africa, and there was a shift to the problem of immigration. And the Venice Biennale that finished recently, and kind of foreseeing the events of this year, was focused on climate. So in terms of the human world and looking at the global situation, so basically it's becoming larger and larger, the focus of the Biennale. So art, science, politics, humans really do need to consider in an overall way all of these different areas. But in terms of a theme being consumed, the experience this year of the coronavirus, I also feel that maybe this will be used as a theme that is consumed in the same way for an exhibition in the near future. So in terms of what is being debated in the COVID-19, art really needs to function to really discuss this problem and understand it. Thank you. If there is a reply to Kureya-san's comment from Nanjo or any of the others. So, Nanjo, if you could. I'm not sure if this connects with what Kureya said, but in terms of the future exhibition that I mentioned earlier, one of my friends is working in innovation, and listening to the art dialogue, it tends to be about stuff in the past. So people working in the art world have studied art history and are explaining from this art historical background. But in terms of his area of innovation, they don't talk about the past, they only talk about the future. I really thought I understood. Maybe this should also happen in art. So that's why I actually organized the exhibition at Mori Museum about the future and space. Looking at technology And there is technology that we have managed to realize that before we wouldn't have thought possible. That we are able to realize designers' babies, they kind of become reality. So there are also lots of things that probably we shouldn't be doing. And this is kind of ethical problems. And are we able to control them? In terms of the country able to control, some things can be controlled, some things cannot. I think it will really cause problems. So humans are, the possibilities are really test them.
So ethically it's wrong to do it, but if it's there, then we can't stop us. Maybe there are people who try it in art. So that's the world which we are living in now. And each individual invention experiments, those people who are conducting, they're not really thinking about it, but the art from the outside, they can just observe objectively what is really happening. But at the same time, they can just draw out something from it instinctively. Or an art allows us to sort of evoke, or start thinking there may be a potential problem in there. Thank you very much. So Ute, Rax, if there's something from your side. So based on the comments from Kuraya, for example, we should not forget and we should not commodify the crisis in the past. And also, as Nan just mentioned, the learning. So the museum or art university or the exhibition on international scale, what can we learn from them? So the art is capable of visualizing something which we can't see. And what sort of people can we work together? So including those things Ute, do you have any comments? Since you're working at the university.
No, I just think it's. I'm really grateful for to being straightforward about Fukushima, which I know is not an easy thing to do in Japan, and to address there is still an issue. I mean, we worked with the 311 initiative in 2011 with my Japanese colleagues at MIT. And while in the beginning there was a lot of talk about what can be done and if Japan is divesting from nuclear power, I think that became more and more silent. Germany divested immediately afterwards. Angela Merkel decided then we will definitely disengage, but of course they regretted it in the meantime, but it was a done deal, so hopefully it stays like this. So I think it's really important to be outspoken about our things and the courage that we should not expect this just from artists. We should have the courage also as heads of institutions, in universities. I mean, each of us should say something. So I'm really grateful. And I'm grateful that artists and curators sharing their thoughts and concerns with us. And I think it really is important. And Fumio, I just think there can be no future without the past. And there is no past without a future. I think we cannot separate this. And, it's I learned at MIT that scientists who look into the future look very much from the past because they have to learn, they have to evolve. You know, it's not, they don't start scratch. And I think hopefully we learn also something from the past and maybe also from the now, to have maybe a more responsible future. And I think we really, what becomes very obvious even in a place like Singapore, which is a very wealthy kind of like context, that even in Singapore we face a lot of poverty and disenfranchisement, and even in Singapore we have homeless people, which I was not so aware of, because we travel, you know, we are more around the globe, and this pandemic, the slowing down and fixing us a little bit to our locales, I totally agree, there is a potential, because we have to start seeing again, you know, it's not so easy to close eyes. And so I think, as much as you also addressed, there is a Fukushima, I think there is something at every place that we need to address. And I think there is really a potential in learning back seeing. And yeah, that would be maybe one of my responses.
That's an interesting question about the future and the past. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
The future and the past was there's this kind of social psychological kind of intellectual who does work through psychology, Ashish Nandi. He in India, he's a very old man now. He has this interesting idea that he always used to say in one-to-one and as well as in seminar, that if you do not have an idea of an open past, you cannot produce open futures. So in a sense that because futures and past are, as we know, are mental constructs we produce to order time. And he would say that the more open you are to your past, actually is a sign that you will be open to your future. The more close to your past, you will be more close to your future. And this is something also to the question of the idea of the optic, you know. I think last 200, 300 years, we got too obsessed with the ocular way of making sense of the world. This optic of that to see. And I think with toxicity, while working on it for the last 2 years, and also the grappling that the artist has to do, now there is a return to our other senses, the smell, taste. In actually, we have to then finally relay in various optical forms. But the thing is that the question is that what you cannot see anymore, can never see actually, a toxin can't be seen, like radioactivity, you can't see it actually. What you actually see is kind of various embodied modes by which it appears in front of you. And those embodied modes of appearance, whether in nature, whether it's through human body, whether it's through interactions, boundaries of interaction, prohibitions of interactions, those things are now very apparent, which can't be understood and organized through eye. And I think one of the most interesting thing is that we have suddenly have this situation where there is a crisis of the knowledge of the eye, because that's the two way in which coordinates of our lives are produced, where the stench, the rot, you know, like all kinds of things have appeared, you know, whether from below the earth, whether from the sky, whether from each other. And that's a very, very kind of difficult but an exciting new opening for the world civilization. That's why I think we have to open the past to enter this future. Otherwise, we'll be trapped in a very narrow bandwidth of a present, which is actually 200, 300 years old, you know.
Monica, if you have something to add, or a question even.
Monica is mute. Monica, you're mute.
Monica, you're not.
Sorry, yeah, got it. Sorry, I wanted to just take off a little bit from what Priya-san had said about the function of the artist in a way, and I want to talk about orders of attention. And I think that there are always things that are present around us. It's not that they're not there. It's not like we, you know, especially in the kind of world that we live at the moment, it is not possible to not know if you really want to know. The question is how attentive is one to certain aspects of the world that's around us, right? I think it's interesting that the artist, in a sense, has become a locus where the attentiveness that they might pay to the world around, the capacity to lend an ear, if you were to move away from the ocular, but perhaps to the acoustic. And we had a work many years ago called A Measure of Anacoustic Reason. The fact that sometimes we are surrounded by a kind of reasoning that is incapable of hearing. It's an anacoustic hearing, an acoustic reason. And I feel that artists and certain other roles in society have the capacity to be more attentive to the acoustic capacity to listen to the world, to be more attentive to it. And I think these orders of attention, what is interesting about situations like an art award or like a triennial, where you are actually sort of focusing, bringing things together, is that you are able to say, let's foreground that attentiveness. And therefore, these situations become a moment that we can actually say, it's not a question of learning from the artist, but being attentive to attentiveness. And I think that might be a way of approaching how one even looks at the artist and the art exhibition in such situations, in such times.
But I think, just to add to that, I mean, what Jepesh and Monica said, what is very interesting to me is that you brought up the visible and the invisible, because I think the challenge with with COVID is it's almost like two divides. The one that get really into panic because you cannot see it. So you're always afraid, it's always there, it's at every corner, it's everywhere. So it also comes with some degree of paranoia. And then there are the others, they think because they don't see it, it's not there. So they ignore it, they don't wear masks, and so we cannot see this COVID, so it might not be here. So it's really interesting, Jepesh, like to follow this notion of that we are so conditioned to go through the optics, because both are actually determined by optics, the invisibility of the virus. And we lost a bit of what we call common sense, or when you say what is with developing a sensibility again, to look into the future is maybe we have to learn to reactivating a little bit our senses after we went through a lot of audio-visual kind of conditioning through screens, etc., like telephones. So maybe we have to reactivate our sensorium to other detections, because maybe then we can also navigate such a situation better, not through panic or not through ignorance, but maybe to position it to have a better positioning capacity towards not only this pandemic, but in general, to position ourselves differently in the world, not just through audio-visual kind of like sensing.
There is this very interesting thing, and I can say this just 1 minute, because in mysticism there is always this. Have you seen God? You will find in many mystic tradition there is this question that a great mystic is asked: have you seen God? And the answer is not seeing. The answer will be touch. That God can touch you. In a sense that God descends to touch you, or you ascend to touch the God. In a sense that you can't see the God. In that because it's the limit of your senses that something else appears. So, and that's the openness I think artists bring that openness to the world. That's why people get very restless with artists. But I think it's that space, that strange space where you just defy the main question and say something else. Yeah.
So I totally agree with Ute and Jepesh. ごめん、なんか間違えた。間違えました。なんだっけ。はい、Ute さんと
So what Ute and Vijay said. So in terms of light and art, the kind of traditional image of art, things that are invisible being made visible. this is what we talked, but what you just, both of you spoke about in terms of listening, looking, touching. This is kind of also a way of using the imagination. I really have an interest in this. So Jibesh and Ute, so in terms of being open to things, I wonder, what do you imagine then for art in the future in terms of what you were speaking about?
No, I think art's aspiration is to defy the question that is normally asked about how you perceive the world, and to open up that space, of the perception, to bring in a certain degree of disbelief in our dominant habits, to open up other edges of thought. So I think the most interesting point of doing art or being with artists is that you're always in some strange threshold of some kind of perceptual field or an experiential field, where something is not taken for the questions that are habitually to you are not taken for granted. That space, I think, will expand. With the COVID now, and artists have a bigger kind of space to articulate that. Because they've always been articulating. If you have an exhibition for 1.5 years, 2 years, if you look at all the artworks, artists have been working on very difficult questions around how do you actually narrate toxicity. The example of the artist or the Buddha's last movement is about this question. But suddenly today, you can see the force of that question. And I think the ground is fertile. At least artists are there, the works are there, the questions are there, the ways of doing things are there. That needs to be just brought into a bigger debate, or taken, like Monica said, attentive, to make that attentive.
But I think also it has to do with time. I don't think it is only artists also who would have this capacity, but I think luckily many artists still insist on time, and some artists still have time because they have no market. And this is why they can engage in topics for longer, or like when you usually would have to move on, they're still sticking to something. And if you hang out a little longer, or like you might not only see something, you might also hear something, and you might not only hear something, you also might smell something, so the longer you stick to something, the more complex things are unfolding. And I mean, this is completely true. I mean, if we look up different kind of archiving processes, or often artists are engaging in a different way, or finding even archives that are left out with official kind of archival processes. And so, but I think also in the sense of not just visual art, and Monica brought this up, also to look into the acoustics and to look into other kind of like a sensorium. So I think this is actually shared, even that artists share that with scientists, this curiosity of the world. I mean, when I was at MIT, I was so amazed by the scientists I met there, because they had exactly this openness, Jibesh, that you mentioned. They look very open and to the backwards, not like, it's not grant administrators that I'm talking, or science administrators. I really look into people. They sometimes, in a very openness of a child, want to understand the universe, or they want to understand other galaxies, or they want to understand parallel worlds, or the world of microbes. And I think there I found that there is a lot of parallel, actually, curiosity and this desire to understand the larger picture that is shared with artists. I mean, this that you would not in your everyday tend to ask. I mean, where does the universe end? Is there a hole after the black hole? Or what is darker than dark? Or like, how deep is the ocean? I mean, like, so, and I think there is something to give this again space. And as you said, like to give space for the arts and not just use art as a service entity to feed our entertainment industry, or cultural industries, but also to give science that space back to explore. Because now we basically have to fulfill a grand indicators, etc. So a lot of science is also no more happening. So, but I hope with the pandemic that we understand what Fumio also said is not just quantity, but the need for quality, and quality needs time. And I think what we really need at this moment is time. And if we see a gift in this COVID with all the devastation it brings, it really has slowed us down. You know, I experience time differently. Yeah, I mean, if you're in a lockdown, time can become very long, but also you perceive your world around you differently. And I think to a certain extent, in all the toxicity that came with it, there is, to be with you, Monica, there is an afterglow. And I hope this afterglow is lasting a bit longer, because I see a lot of light, other lights shining already again to dominate this afterglow, which I actually really appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we only have 1 minute left. If Nanjo has something to say at the end. So in the 60s, there's a writer in the 60s. He talked about philosophy and kind of found the commonalities. And in his book, Buddhism, Christianity, it's kind of a similar experience of enlightenment in terms of wonderful scientists, artists. Maybe they also are seeing something like this, something that is invisible that they are maybe seeing, and kind of a reality expanding. So in just a very small part of this is where we are existing. And to kind of understand that we are just a very small part of this large expanse of things. This is kind of experienced through intuition, through this kind of enlightenment. So we actually have reached the end of the discussion. So in listening to everyone's comments, in terms of what is invisible being made visible. So for example, in this situation, Nanjo is talking about physical experience of exhibition, and the other people are experiencing by online. It is simply just about a different experience. Things that is not being seen and discussing. And there was some misunderstanding through seeing online or being there physically. But in terms of the difficulty of the experience, but there is something, a kind of a new experience that came through doing this. And in terms of RACs not being able to actually come to Yokohama Triennale, and that we are still able to experience this. From the future of exhibitions, I think there will be some hints, important kind of knowledge that we gain from this. Finally, I would definitely like to invite everyone to see Nissan Art Award and Yokohama Triennale 2020. In terms of foresight that was mentioned, things that are invisible that are going to become visible in the future. I'm sure that you will be able to enjoy the work after listening to the discussion today. Thank you, Ute, Rax Collective, Kuraya-san, and Nanjo, and for the interpreters, and for the staff of Dommune. Thank you very much for listening and joining us today. Next, we'd like to ask the finalists of the Nissan Art Award, and perhaps there will be some things from the discussion today that will come out of what they say. So thank you very much. I'd like to finish there.
これ何休憩に入ったのかな。
声入ってるかな。聞こえる？
はい。
はーい。
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so is it okay to start? So, good evening, everyone. So, continuing on, we'd like to do the sideline event, commentary about Nissan Art Award 2020 by the finalists. Yeah, if you can just turn yours to mute while I speak. I am Shomi Yuko, and I'm working together with Naomi Horiuchi, who just joined the discussion on the Nissan Award Art Project Office and also at AIT. So I would like to thank Ukawa Naohiro from Super Dommune for cooperating with this event and giving this opportunity to quickly connect with the finalists at home in their studio via Zoom to tell listeners about their new work directly. Thank you. So I would like to, without further delay, start, but just introduce. This is actually the first time we filmed Nissan Art Award for the first time, made a video, and while showing this video, I would like to ask the finalists to speak about the highlights of their work and also the production environment, which was subject to change because of the COVID-19 experience, the pandemic. Sometimes maybe things didn't go to plan, but we'd like to just ask for 4 or 5 minutes from each participant to speak. And first of all, Sachiko Kazuma. Kazuma, are you there? Hello. You're at home, right? I'm waiting at home. Thank you. Just a little bit about Sachiko Kazuma. She's working in Tokyo, and she does in-depth research to understand contemporary society and history to develop unique woodblock prints. This time, she has shown a previous work at this Olympics and some new works. So in terms of showing in the 2020, we heard about looking at the past from Ute. I think this also connects with Kazuma's work. So in terms of this, and also about the work now, if you could say a few words. I think the video will be shown now. So the first video that we have made, the Nissan Art Award.
Yes, I can see. So allow me to explain my works. So the theme I set was the dark legacy. So dark legacy as in dark legacy. So now we moving into Reiwa, and then we are facing Corona, and then people may be thinking the after Corona. So I thought maybe better to revisit those dark legacies from the past, and yeah, that's why I set the theme. And this huge woodblock work is the Olympic 2068 based on the Japanese chronological era, and this Olympic, and that's the opening ceremony for it. So about 80 years ago, so 2600, which was the based on the Japanese chronological area, we scheduled Olympic, and it didn't happen. So juxtaposing the sense of time 80 years ago and today, that's how I constructed the visuals for it. And 1940 was was basically like a strong right-wing movement in Japanese government, and based on the eugenic ideology, they're trying to sort of control the like Japanese nationals. And this is the new work. So, like the based on the Pavilion series. So the one before was the R3 Fort, and this one, that's the elephant one. Yes, Pavilion R3 Fort and the Pavilion White Elephant. So can you stop it at the Pavilion series? So these two works. So it's like basically like a capitalistic ideology. Like one of the some of the homeworks left because from that I created. I thought like that was quite interesting to sort of like put it as the put it into the visuals. And the Pavilion R3 Fort is because the venue was the Nissan Pavilion. So I used the Nissan Skyline modified, of course, as a motif. And the other one is the Pavilion White Elephant is the biggest problem that which we are facing, like the Monju and the White Elephant is like literally it's like a good for nothing basically. And for the installation works, so there's a door right next to this work, and what's the entrance for the like a storage of the venue? Can you just move on to the next one? Oh yeah, this one, yeah. So yen equals to infinity is the installation work. So it's like a futuristic notes. Basically, Shibuya Eiichi, he will be the is the 10,000 notes like in which will come in the future. So I just used that as a motif. So like the Olympic, such as like sort of a huge Olympic, huge national project, and regardless like whether that's going to be successful or not, like the government just pumping into lots of money and budget. And there's another calendar work, which is this one. It's a called Count Zero. And a new national stadium, like if you look from the top, like it's the shape of zero. So so like basically just before starting the fast of the January 2020, starting with zero. So like sort of like has like certain expectation and the disappointment of the Olympic. Anyway, thank you very much.
じゃあ次、三原総一郎さんお願いしたいと思います。三原さんは今京都からご参加いただいているかと思うんですけれども、三原さん音ご存知の方もいるかもしれないんですが、音、泡、放射線、虹。
So, as some people might know, Soicho uses sound, foam, radiation, rainbows, microorganisms, moss, air, currents, and electrons, among other things, in the materials work to combine natural phenomena and media technology. And this time he's created a structure resembling a kind of stall on site, and it has become a kind of place of relaxation for visitors, so I have heard. So, Soichiro, I would like you to just say something about your work. So we will show the video. If you can say something. So good evening, everyone. I'm Mihara. So the video being shown now. This is my new installation. As explained in the introduction, I use natural phenomena and technology, and in real time I use them. This is kind of, I just really consciously did this for this work. So within this work, I have really about life, production, different kind of layers, important layers, and kind of using them directly in my work. From 2 years ago, I was kind of researching different aspects of the work, and one thing that I thought was interesting, the kind of water in the air there are kind of different techniques to do this. So if I was able to make this kind of thing, then maybe within the exhibition space itself, I would be able to show visibly the water in the air. Had this idea, the thing that is a device that is spinning around, and at the bottom there's kind of condensation on the floor. So when actually the airborne water, there is airborne water is turned into ice and then turned into vapor and changing into different experiences. So in terms of water, the key point in terms of water is kind of the connection with life and also the circulation of water in the earth. So even in my work also, I hope to kind of, as a metaphorical way of showing this, I also used moss and actually growing moss in the space. And there is 1-2 months for the exhibition. I'm really curious about how the moss will grow in the space. So in your place, we can see moss behind you. And it's, yes, I prepared it just in case. So thank you. So next, Nobuko Tsuchiya, we'd like to ask you to speak. So if you can turn on. She hasn't realized by the looks of things. Okay. So, Nobuko Tsuchiya, I'd like to just introduce you. So you're living in Kanagawa? So using things that are very close to her, a kind of sci-fi style world that she creates, combining familiar materials and scrap materials she has collected. The title of the work, this one, I heard that is connected with the experience of the pandemic, Mute Echoes. I heard that it's really related to her experience this time. So if we can also hear about your experience.
Yes. Yes. I can't. Yeah, just let me try to work it out, what's there on the screen. But it will come up soon. But I can't see. Oh, well, yes. Yeah, yes. Please just play, and then I can understand what's going on. So title is Mute Echoes. So I personally feels like the title quite matches with the actual output, and so the silence echoing, mute echoing, and the exhibition itself, it's quite silent, mute-ish. I mean, as far as I'm concerned. So the production process, whatever feeling I had, I also try to sort of reflect the feeling I had during that time, but it's coming out on those works. And in total, 8 works there in a space. And the main work is the white. So the one is called Mute Echo. The one's sitting in the center of the space. And I use the musical terminology for different works. So it's like a silent music is just being played or something. For example, this one, Breathe. For example, this one, Crochet. It's a fourth note basically, or it's like sometimes something strange or those like sort of connotation to it. So it's like a little bit strange work basically. And key, desk. So what's Wada-san's work is coming up, but because I got a phone call, so it's slightly panic. But so can we just scroll back to see the Tsuchiya's work? For example, the first one, the ones this like pinkish, bubbly work is brave. Means like actual musical note. And this is actually pink. So if you touch it, it's like a kind of fluffy, bubbly, as there's air in it. And sorry, that sort of explain. That's all I can explain basically. But so I'm using various materials, and it's maybe different. I mean, like sort of. It's I mean, but like it's maybe difficult to sort of like simply say please do come and see, but like sort of you can use a car park there, so use your car and then pop in and see my work. So as I said, I'm using various materials, and so the sense is in the previous talk, as far as I'm concerned, I'm the conscious, subconscious, but I'm quite interested in sort of subconscious part of so subconsciousness, so something sort of which you don't remember, but physically you do remember, for example. So various memories, or some of the memories even before you're born, or maybe when you're a fish. So there's so many different things, something which we can't even understand, but those things accumulating within ourselves, and because we don't understand it, I think there's a great potential to it, and through my work, if people get something out of it and out from my works, and then sort of if my work stimulates their imagination, then that would be quite exciting. For example, consciousness, subconsciousness, consciousness, for example, is something which you are aware, something you can recognize, and those things so it's conscious, so you think about sort of how you behave or how you get looked in a society, or something you have something you have as your a principle based on religion or something, so something I'm just kind of sort of expecting sort of people may be able to sort of let go of those things, and but personally because I'm having trouble fitting into society, so it's so some of the struggles I can go to schools, and those difficulties, but somehow I still get over with those things and those struggles, difficulties. So if they can sort of see or experience or feel something, those things from my work. By the way, so you just mentioned about the briefs, notes and stuff. Saying that the work is bubbly and fluffy and so on and so forth. But when you come, when you see the work, don't touch it. I mean, it's great for talking about hard work in that way, but people don't touch it.
So next, I'd like to move on to Wada. Thank you, Juniors. So since you're a student, you've been acting as an artist and musician in the fields of music and art. and you're using kind of reel-to-reel tape recorders, CRT televisions, kind of old-fashioned electric appliances with modern technology, and making new instruments and making performances and installations using them. Actually, I'm sure that there are many fans of your live performances at Dommune. And in your project, I think there was a large physical influence on because of the COVID-19 outbreak. But on the other hand, this has arguably led to a new work that can be realized only because of this. And yeah, if you could talk a little about this. So, first of all, Wada's work, there will be one with sound first, and then after that we will ask him to speak after that by lowering the volume. Okay.
そしたらそろそろちょっと話してもいいですか?
Okay. So maybe I will speak now. So, from first of all, Electronicos Fantasticos, a kind of participatory project, and all kinds of people join, and they use old appliances and finding new ways of playing them or making them into instruments, like a fan, electric fans, and using kind of electronic appliances to make instruments. So from this project is how I developed this new work. So what did I do in this project? As you can see, this man here, 5 collaborators from different countries. I sent the method of making the instrument and some kind of parts, and asked them to find an old appliance in their country and try to challenge themselves making an instrument and play it in a new way. And that is shown if I return to what was shown at the start of the video, in the way of making the work, and the idea behind it was summarized in a book, a manual. If you could return to that point in the video. As you can see here, I made this manual. The kind of ideas behind the work, 60 pages, a kind of magic book of how to make my instruments. As you can see, the methodology. So the parts and the way of making was sent to each of the countries. So Indonesia, Spain, Colombia, and other countries. This is one thing that I'd always wanted to do, and it was perfect timing. Actually, well, because of the coronavirus, stuff from Argentina hasn't actually arrived, so that will be added to the exhibition if it arrives. So the idea of each person using something from their country and playing is kind of this idea of an orchestra. And of course we cannot travel at the present situation, but just the concept of the work is traveling instead. That's the kind of the idea of the installation. Completely by chance, but the fact that there's this distance between us, but we are still able to send the instructions and the parts, and the collaborators are still able to participate. Electronic Magnetic Orchestra Without Borders Pre-Era is the title, and exactly this was the first stage of doing that. So I hope that you go to experience it directly. Thank you. One last thing. On 22nd of August at Dommune, there will be a talk live. And I will talk more about the work. So I hope you will join. Thank you very much. So please join if you can on the 22nd of August. So the work from Colombia was recently added to the work. It actually arrived very soon, and edited the work. I will be able to add one song after editing. So we look forward to seeing that. Thank you. We are slightly over time, but the final finalist, Ishu Han, are you there? Good evening. Ishu Han makes video works, installation, photography and painting, using these different methods to make work about identity. Han also has combined old and new works to create a kind of immersive installation. So Han, during the stay-home period before the exhibition, we had an online Zoom drinking party online. Do you remember? And you talked about the darker periods of the production. And I remember, yeah, it was very memorable, the things that you were talking about, the sense of discord that you felt at the time. And I really think your work reflects this. If you could talk about that.
So shall I just... Yeah, please listen to the sound, actually. It's about 1 minute. So yeah, maybe that's enough, I suppose. You know, if you can start like talking about your works. So good evening, I'm Han, and so this work. So it's called Where Are You Now? That's the title. So huge tetrabot covered with the like space blanket. So using those materials, and it's like, you know, the height is about like 3.2 meters height. And I just projected images of sea, like a shot from various locations, and then like with small monitors, like, and I'm just showing my performative work. And also, the one of the monitors is basically like showing that tetrapod is floating on the sea. So that's the whole piece. And so tetrapod. So in Japan, you see like lots of tetrapod on the seashores. And the first time when I saw them, I was like, I felt it's like, you know, the wave approaching from the sea. It's basically like a tetrapod is like visualizing the wave, basically. And that's what I was thinking. And it's like, you know, something which we can't see on the other side. And then, like, you know, there's somehow like, you know, visualizing it with this sort of scientific form. And using that tetrapod, I was thinking like, you know, maybe I can make something like some artwork, and I just covered with the space blanket. So space blanket was initially invented in States, like, you know, in order to sort of send people up in space, and then eventually. Yes, it's been used to protect people as well as like to protect devices, basically, and because the blanket moved on to the mass production mode, so the price went down, and if you think about it today, like, you know, after the earthquake, like, you know, for those people who can't really go back home, or like, you know, those people, like, you know, like there was basically migrants, like, which I saw on the TV. They come from the other side, and then, like, you know, they receive those materials. So, like, you know, it's more or less like becoming like everyday material, and it's to keep our temperatures, basically, and using that material and the covering tetrapod with that material, with that blanket. That's what I just made. And so tetrapod, like, you know, sort of, it's most effective when it's in mass. So, like, it absorbs, like, you know, the power of the waves, and being in the mass, like, it becomes more stronger in a way. And that's the like, basically, like, as far as I'm concerned, like, you know, that's like mass, basically, for me. And so the group of tetrapod. And in my work, the one basically, like, you know, the one tetrapod, like, basically leaves from the group or leaves from the mass, and we don't know where it's going, and that's kind of sort of metaphorical. It's like letting yourself go of the wave, and basically, like, you know, its whole purpose or whole function of tetrapod, whole meaning itself, like, you know, just disappears, basically. And tetrapod is like normally made out of concrete, so it's like never stands chance of floating on the water. But in my work, it's floating, and this, you know, floating tetrapod, like, you know, I thought, like, I could crystallize that sort of like loneliness, sadness, and it's floating like a spaceship, basically, and then maybe, like, you know, one day reach somewhere, basically. That's the imagination I had, and that loneliness, like, what is it? Like, you know, where does it come from? Like, you know, where's it come from? And so, like, I made this work in April, and to that point, like, I was staying at home, and that loneliness is somehow, it's like, you know, you're trying to connect to society. You somehow, like, you know, get forced to get connected to the society, and that loneliness comes from society, basically, like, and that's what I felt. And So crystallizing that, like, the existence into the tetrapod and then floating away somewhere. And you somehow get forced to get connected to society in a way, like, that's like, basically our body is trapped into that situation, and that's what I was thinking basically, like, when I was making, and so yeah, I'd love to hear more, but time is over. Sorry. So yeah, let's plan something, some other occasion, like maybe like next time, like at the actual venue. So anyway, like everyone, thank you very much, and we had to rush up, but so we had a brief talk by the 5 finalists, and so maybe like with this talk, like you may be able to sort of like get closer to the works, and yes, like with just 30 minutes, like if you if you can feel that, if you find that this art award is like challenging, and the venue, the exhibition already started, and the venue is the Nissan Pavilion right next to the Anpanman Museum. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So those people, who watched this program, thank you very much, and we'd love to see you there at the venue. Thank you.